interest of time, thank you for recording this because we did have a request. Um, my name is Karen Shelton. I'm with Public Consulting Group, and I also work with the DV Council, San Diego Domestic Violence Council. And I love what the council does. And we decided that we actually need to meet with the faith community as well, because there's domestic abuse does not discriminate. It crosses cultures, it crosses ages, and it's been around forever. So I wanted to welcome you on behalf of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council and want to share a universal thought with you before we get started really quickly. And so wanted to think about the olive and the pressing that happens, that in order to get the oil. So we all love olive oil. It's actually healthier for us to use olive oil as opposed to corn oil. But if you think about the olive, how do we get the oil out of the olive? It's the pressing. And the same thing happens to us in life. We sometimes are pressed from this angle or we're pressed from that angle. And it's very uncomfortable when we're being pressed, but it's a part of our process. But if we look at the fact that it produces something good that comes out of our pressing, for example, here's another fruit that's pressed, grapes. And for the wine lovers, we like the fact that they press grapes to get something good out of it. So I want to encourage us today, whenever life presses us, and it's very uncomfortable, but you're being processed, and keep in mind that something good is going to come out of that pressing. And so I want to encourage you today, if you are like me and being pressed by situations and circumstances, emotions, or whatever we might be facing, there's always something good on the other side of that. So
Amen.
We're happy, yes, we're happy to have you with us this morning. And I'm going to introduce Ms. Claudia Grasso. She is currently the president of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council. She's a trailblazer, and she just makes everything flow correctly with a spirit of excellence. So we absolutely love you, Claudia, and we're so grateful to have you with us today. So if you could give us a few words, and then if you'd like to introduce our speaker, we really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you to those of you that are joining us today. I'm very grateful for this group. The DV Council really values our faith leaders because, as Karen said, this is a great avenue to get to our congregations and talk about the uncomfortable topic that is domestic abuse and what we can do to help those that are victimized by it. As Karen said, I'm Claudia Garcia Grasso. I am the president of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council for about 4 more months. I am coming to an end of my 4 years that I have held this role that has been just invaluable, so rewarding, and I am so proud of what our council has accomplished. I'm also the executive director of One Safe Place, the Family Justice Center in San Marcos that provides wraparound services to victims of abuse. To get us started, I wanted to share a little bit. As I mentioned, in October, I have the extreme pleasure of handing over the baton. I mean, of course, it's bittersweet. The council will always be near and dear to my heart. And I will be active in the North County DV Coalition, and as much as I can here in the faith leadership, being in North County, this is, kind of where I work and I'm able to do, but I am so excited for our president-elect and who is to take up that mantle and run with it. We voted and the choice is someone that I truly believe will take our council to yet another level. I love that she brings a variety of perspectives, not only from the perspective of the victim, but also of the offender. And many times that in DV circles is not something we talk about as readily. And I love that she will bring this to the council and offer just through the eyes of a therapist, yet a different way to look at things. So the council is in extremely great hands. I am very, very proud. I'm not leaving yet. I still have until October. I have a few, things yet to accomplish, but I'm very excited where our council is heading and where it will go. I am leaving it in great hands in October, and I'm excited and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about where she's coming from. But it is my very, very extreme pleasure to hand the meeting over to our president-elect in October to be president of the San Diego Domestic Violence Council, Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez.
Yay, thank you, Ms. Claudia. So poised. Thank you for those kind words. As Claudia mentioned, my name is Dr. Vanessa Rodriguez. I'm a psychologist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Before I kind of begin, Ms. Karen, I do want to be sensitive to what your plans are, because I know I'm going to give a brief education / 101 training. So I don't know if you want me to just introduce myself now, if you want to address the meeting items first, and then me at the tail end. You kind of tell me. I don't want to hijack everything right now.
Yeah, you go right ahead and just flow with what you've prepared, because we just really want to hear from you, and you are the center of this meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Karen, no pressure. Okay.
You're welcome.
All right, do you mind if I, before I kind of take over right now, I know Mia, I know Miss Amelia and Miss Gina, but the other people that are here today, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, great idea.
Thank you.
If you could please unmute and introduce yourself, Youssef. I see you, Youssef.
You want me to start?
Hello, everyone. I'm Youssef Miller. I'm the founder of Mosque Against Trafficking, also with the North County Equity and Justice Coalition, along with other anti-domestic violence groups, IVAT, and so on. So that's me. I live in Escondido.
Love it.
Thank you.
I used to live in Elfin Forest. Used to be my old hood. Okay, nice to meet you, Youssef.
Okay, if each of you
Hi,
could.
everybody. My name is
Okay, thank you.
Akbar. I'm from Somali Family Services, and I'm a community health worker.
I'm sorry,
Yes, good morning.
where are you from?
Somali Family Services.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, brother Youssef. Long time I don't see you.
Oh, familiar faces.
Yes, this is me, Haitham Salmu. I'm working as a community health worker with the Somali Family Service of San Diego. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Is that it? So Julio?
Yes, good morning. This is Julio Ramos. I'm a parent educator with a positive parenting program at Jewish Family Service, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
And I think I know everybody else. Okay. So for those that do know me, sorry that this may be redundant, but for those that do not know me, I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experience and then professional experience. And I'm going to spend some time on some education, which is my passion. So born and raised in San Diego, and considering this is a faith leaders meeting, I I am a proud Catholic school upbringing. I went to St. Michael's from K all the way through senior year, went to Our Lady of Peace. So faith, religion has been a very big piece of my identity as I throughout my personality. So regarding my professional experience, I've been working in the field of domestic violence, and please, I will use DV and IPV, narcissistic abuse, kind of interchangeably, as well as victim, survivor, offender, perpetrator. So please, you know, I just want to kind of throw that out there. So I've been doing this work for nearly 2 decades. I've pretty much all direct client care. It hasn't been until the recent years that I've shifted my role to other duties in addition to client care, which is clinical supervision, training, education, so on and so forth. So, and I want to really thank Claudia for bringing up earlier about highlighting the different perspectives that I am proud to be bringing to the council and to the community. My work started in Hawaii, working with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, as they were petitioning for temporary restraining orders. So I would do court outreach, court accompaniments, a lot of crisis intervention, education. And at that point, I had also started working, you know, very closely with law enforcement, attorneys, case managers, social workers, and first responders. And that really kind of set the stage throughout my entire career. Fast forward, I years ago with Amelia and Office of Violence Prevention in the county, I had managed DV Links, which is, I'm sure you're all aware of. It's the county's 24-hour domestic violence hotline. And from there, I've also worked in group homes with New Alternatives. And I think that my perspective as relates to trauma, family violence, child abuse, I then began to get a different perspective or experience on what it's like to, as a child who experiences family violence in the home. Fast forward, I've done work with, I was a PERT clinician with the El Cajon Police Department, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that. What that role entails. I've worked for Kaiser in their psychiatry and addiction department. But all the while, I have always had a professional and personal passion to helping end abuse and heal from trauma and abuse. I personally am a survivor of sexual assault and rape and narcissistic abuse. And I think the plethora and diverse lens and my personal experience really has driven me to make this again part of my identity. This really is part of my life. This is a passion, a chosen passion. I'm continued to commit my life to this. Currently, I have a group clinic with licensed clinical supervisors, registered associates, student interns, and everyone that is in this team, this family team, that is our collective mission to providing quality care to anyone impacted by abuse, trauma, critical incidents, which the other perspective that my hope, one of my hopes moving forward with the council is to really start educating, providing a lot of training on not only domestic violence, family abuse, relationship abuse, child abuse, but to also really provide training, education on vicarious trauma and how this work impacts us. Because this work, and I know the familiar faces, I've been doing this work for a very long time. We need to be kind of self-equipped with competence and confidence on how to manage our vicarious trauma, our personal histories, our transference or countertransference issues that happen with the work that we do. And I got not only personal experience, but again, professional experience doing a lot of work, particularly with offenders, as well as the work that I've done with first responders. We are all in some sort of, depending on the scale, in essence, in post-traumatic conditions from childhood, from intimate relationships, from work relationships, from peers, from bullying, society, that we're sadly, you're a very traumatized collective. And so my hope, my mission is to really arm anybody that is open and willing to receive education on what it looks like, why it happens, why it exists, and to essentially help interrupt patterns, to help suspend it, to help seize it, to help create division, so we can have healthier, safer, loving relationships, true, authentic, loving relationships, rather than inauthentic, false, fantasy reenactments of our childhood history, childhood trauma history. Okay, so before I transition into some education, is there any questions about, for me, about any of my experience or anything I shared or anything like that?
I'd just like to make a quick comment. I'm really excited to hear your vision of providing services for us, the service providers, around vicarious trauma, because of some of the things we hear throughout any day. It's hard. We have to learn how to separate ourselves from that and reset ourselves. So I'm always looking for tools for that to share with my team as well in my office. And I'm looking forward to that part of what you have planned for us. So thank you for that and for sharing your heart.
Yes. You're welcome. The work we do is not easy. It is emotionally taxing and frustrating and exhausting, and does not mean that does not equate to burnout or compassion fatigue. It's just a fact. It is it's challenging, because as you know, statistically, how difficult it is to end these toxic, abusive relationships. So yes, I 100% am eager to begin. I think that's, like I said, one goal of mine as this platform, to really educate us on how to help not only who we come in contact with, but help ourselves. We cannot pour from an empty cup. I'm sure you've heard of that. Okay. So I took some notes, guys. So first, full self-disclosure, I am not a very competent Zoom trainer. Not my thing whatsoever. I don't have fancy PowerPoints and graphs, and I apologize for that. I was thinking about at least putting content on the screen, but I would ask that if this can be more of an open discussion and conversation. I know I don't have that much time, and I have so much in my brain that I am like really eager to share with you. So it was very difficult trying to condense it. So what I do want, so how I want to spend the next, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes is two things. I want to explain to you why power control happens, why the cycle of abuse continues. I'm gonna, make a big jump, make a big assumption, but I'm hopefully a safe assumption that we all know power control will. We all know the cycle of abuse, our cycle of violence. I'm unsure if people are familiar with the narcissistic cycle of abuse. Is everybody familiar with this narcissistic cycle of abuse?
I am not.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
Yeah, the floor is open to you, and
Okay.
we have you can go 30 minutes. You don't have to break it down. So go ahead.
Okay.
We
So
need-
let me okay, well, let me pull it back then. In DV, we know the 101's power control. Okay. And another part of the 101s to domestic violence is they call it the cycle of abuse or cycle of violence. And there's really 3 phases that happen in the cycle of abuse. It's the honeymoon phase. And now I'm going to explain in a second, but it's a honeymoon phase, tension building, acute explosion, and then back to the honeymoon phase. Honeymoon phase is very, I'll get to that in a second, but in these 3 phases, right smack in the middle that allows this cycle to continue is denial on both ends, that they're in this cycle. Now, again, that's kind of a classic Duluth model when it comes to domestic abuse. Now, narcissistic abuse, this term was coined in 1995 by a professor named Sam Vaknin, who that's the person I went a year or 2 ago now, training, and I attended a training in Romania by this person, Sam Vaknin. Narcissistic abuse is very similar to domestic violence. Okay, narcissistic abuse, it's just a more clinical way to understand domestic violence. So what the narcissistic cycle of abuse looks like, rather than the honeymoon phase, it's known as the idealization phase. And so what happens in this phase, I'm going to read this to you guys. In the idealistic phase or idealization phase, there's immense flattery. There's gifts. Maybe you've heard of these kind of more trendy terms, love bombing. It's excessive attention to appeal to your heart. It weakens your defense mechanisms and allows you to be drawn into a whirlwind romance without even realizing it. So with all the work that I've done with both victim treatment and offender treatment, you explain the honeymoon phase. We can spend a whole 2-hour session on it. And they self-disclose their own personal experiences, lived experiences of what this honeymoon phase or phase of idealization. Okay. Now, psychodynamically, why the honeymoon phase exists, why the idealization phase exists. It is because of a psychodynamic concept called merger fusion. It's called dual mothership. It's called a shared fantasy. Now, these are all legitimate psychodynamic terms that were developed by psychoanalysts in Britain. And when you think of this idealization phase or this honeymoon phase, the lived experience is that I am experiencing unconditional love as powerful as a mother gives to their brand new infant, their child. A mother, a loving, healthy mother is going to idealize. They're going to, oh my God, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever, like, that's this unconditional love that a child ought to be experiencing from, and mother, it can be, you know, but the maternal, let's just say maternal. Now, if a child did not experience any of that, what happens is they can fall victim to desiring it, reenacting it, chasing it. It is this, and when one receives this unconditional maternal, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're perfect, it's intoxicating. It's intoxicating, and who does not want to feel that? And oftentimes, with the work that I've done with victims, they remember this phase, and they call it euphoric recall. They hold on to this phase, and they do not want to let that feeling, that experience go. Which hence, that's why it's very difficult to end these abusive relationships. One reason. And that's why it's very difficult to break up, because you're not only breaking up with your partner, you're also breaking up with your mother, and you're breaking up with this idealized image of you. So really, subconsciously, psychodynamically, victims are grieving 3 breakups. They're not grieving the abuse. They're not grieving the threats, the acts of intimidation, the harassment, the emotional abuse, the physical abuse. They're grieving and not wanting to let go of this idealization of themselves. They fall in love. The experience is you fall in love with yourself through their gaze.
Wow.
And am I, what are you guys' thoughts so far?
Wow, that's right.
So what happens is the partners essentially become mothers to each other in this phase. And they merge and they fuse and become one, like a child in their womb. Okay, so if you go back to the cycle of abuse, there's a honeymoon phase, which I kind of just described, the idealization. After this honeymoon phase, then it goes to tension building. Okay. Now you would think you would, any kind of rational next step of this idealization. I love you, love. Like, why the heck how does the abuse come in? Where does it go wrong? This sounds like a perfect, fantastical space to live in. Well, so people that offend, from my experience, they are children. They are emotionally stunted. They are living in a post-traumatic condition of pathological narcissism. So what does that mean? Narcissism is a healthy part of development. Narcissism is a healthy phase in life, childhood development. Think of a child, okay? The mother and child in the womb, they are one, symbiotic, right? This merge of fusion that I was talking about in this idealization phase. They are one. The mother has the baby. The child, the baby, still thinks that they are mommy, that they are one. There is real no separation until, you know, if you really want to get kind of Freudian, until breastfeeding, until the child, and separation can happen when the child realizes that mommy is not tending to the child's needs. So therefore the child becomes frustrated, or a mother becomes frustrated because she's exhausted and tired and needs sleep, you know, any kind of normal, but that's normal, right? That there's supposed to be some separation. So part of healthy narcissism in childhood development, there's separation and then there's individuation. Okay. And the reason why narcissism is healthy during childhood, in order for a child to separate from mommy, they need to be narcissistic. They need to be grandiose. They need to be powerful. They need to be strong. They need to be so, I can conquer the world. I'm strong enough. I'm godlike enough. I can do this on my own. So that's healthy. That's healthy. And then at some point after separation, around adolescence, the child then begins to individuate, now becomes an individual, their own person, autonomy, self-agency. That's why they're testing limits. That's why they're boundaries, freedom, independence. These are all big themes in adolescence. So a child is supposed to separate and then individuate to become an individual, to have an identity separate. Now, if a child, if that process gets interrupted or stunted, the separation and the individuation, the child gets stuck in this phase of narcissism, which then becomes malignant, which is bad, which then becomes pathological, which is bad. Okay, it becomes abusive. So if the environment of the child, mother was, or father, or the family home, there was abuse, there was trauma, there was neglect, there was violence, there was torture, there was just an unsafe environment, or on the flip side, if the child was instrumentalized, if they were pedestalized, like put on a pedestal, if parents had engulfed them, or again, not allowed to separate. So basically the parents like, oh, we're the little handbag or their little mascot. So if there's a lot of reasons that can go awry during this phase. So any questions about that? No. Okay.
I didn't hit my mute button. So this is most amazing. I love this teaching right now. And I think everybody I know, I'm thinking about the people who need to be here right now. So, but I'm gonna, with your permission, I'm gonna share that with someone who I know just survived the things that you're talking about, and then especially the childhood. So the question because she identified her husband or her ex-husband as a narcissist, after doing some study, but it's not nowhere near the depth that's here right now.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the child, when they hit adolescence and the separation that happens, what if during, something happened to that child, like they were molested by, this boy was molested by a woman when he was a child.
Mhm.
And so he ended up being mean to his mom for the rest of his life and mean to his wife. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so is that one of the causes for the,
Yeah. So, yes. So what happens, kind of when I was just explaining this environment, if there's trauma or abuse, family, neighbors, anything, if the environment is toxic and abusive for the child, doesn't allow to, the child, our brains are amazing. Our brains are resilient. They're quite fascinating, and our bodies. But I think what you're kind of inquiring about is what happens. All this environment happens. So what happens? The child develops what it's called a false self. Okay. Because the child needs to protect itself from this environment. And so what happens is this true authentic self that, or inner child work, depending which kind of, treatment therapy modality you're looking at. The true self is loving, it's kind, it's compassionate, is vulnerable, it desires intimacy. But if a true self is not flourished or safe to become, because the environment, the child creates a false self. And with a false self, it's this concept of, it's a structure. It's a defensive personality structure that in some kind of way, the child almost sacrifices their true self to this powerful God as a cloak to protect them. And so throughout life, the false self is having relationships with people and they're abusive. And the false self doesn't really know that they're abusive because there's a really difficult time for them to have any intimacy, any connection, any safety. They don't know what that is. And so the people that when they're abusing other people that are in their true authentic selves, they are getting hurt. Pain and suffering and suffering and pain and pain and pain and suffering. And it's like, what the hell? Why is it difficult for this person to have empathy? Look at all the horrific abusive things that they're doing. How do they not have empathy? It's because they're interacting with a false self in a fantasy world. Okay. So back to the cycle. So there's this idealization and then the devalue. So why do they devalue you? And what devaluing looks like, and if you do comparison to the cycle of violence with the tension building, the devaluing is essentially put downs, gaslighting, condescending remarks, having sarcasm, being emotionally cut off, stonewalling, icing them out. Basically anything that's going to hurt, to cause emotional pain and injuries to their partners. But again, why do this? Especially after this idealization love bombing phase. Why? How do you go from this beautiful, fantastical, shared fantasy space to this? Well, again, back to this separation and individuation. The person that is abusing, they need to separate. They need to individuate. So this person who is an adult, merge and fuse, okay? But with you, with their romantic partner. But remember, this person is a child. So they need to separate, they need to individuate. So in order for them to separate and individuate, for them to become one, they need to put you down, or they need to put their partner down. they need to detach so they can become one. And part of detaching, similar to a child having a temper tantrum, is, dysregulation, emotional dysregulation. Now, emotional dysregulation in adult relationships, obviously, I'm not dense to that, are lethal. They're lethal. Physical abuse, sexual violence, stalking, but they're all forms of emotional dysregulation in an attempt to separate and individuate. So it's interesting when you talk to victims and offenders about this cycle. They all ascribe to it. Everyone understands it. And it's because they're living it. They see the behaviors, they live the behaviors, but until they get the psychogenesis of what's going on, it creates a whole brand new passage for them to reclaim what kind of relationship that they want. If they want to live in a shared fantasy, maybe and some people on either end, I won't say are okay, I shouldn't say okay, but acknowledge and are aware of living in a shared fantasy, of these reenactments of childhood trauma. And some, once they kind of the light bulbs go off, say absolutely not. I need to heal on both ends, victims and offenders. They want to change and interrupt the pattern. Okay, so the last two phases of the narcissistic cycle, again, it's this idealize, devalue, discard. So discard, so idealize, that's the honeymoon phase. Again, that's this kind of shared fantasy of each other, mothering each other, providing unconditional love, togetherness, but codependence, merge, fuse togetherness. But because the child needs to separate, they begin to devalue you via separation. And because the abused child / adult, abusive adult, because they need to individuate to become an individual, they discard you. So they break up, they ghost, they cheat, they have affairs, they just X you out. It X you out. And so during this phase, it's interesting because sometimes the discard can happen in a day, a week, months, years. But what happens is the last part of the cycle is called hoovering or breadcrumbing, which is mean they come back around. And when they come back around, time can be years past. And when they come back around, it's as if no time has passed. It's quite incredible. Because what happens is there's something that's called a snapshot. The clinical term is called an introject. So think of a snapshot as a screenshot. When people take a screenshot, it's a still sculpture. What is it when you polish it? When you're on a phone, when you can filter it up. People that are narcissistic, abusive relationships have snapshots of their partner. And it's this perfect idealized image, which really is this perfect idealized image of the subconscious of their mother and of themselves through the lens, through a symbol of their shared partner. So it's a snapshot. It doesn't move. And so that's why that's why it is when someone who is a victim trying to end a relationship, an abusive relationship, that's why it's the most lethal time, is because the external reality is not matching the person who abuses their snapshot of what they have in their mind. And so the two can't compute, which leads to a completely dysregulation on both ends for the victim and the offender, which, practically speaking, what it looks like is homicide, suicide, in the more severe cases. Okay. Where are you guys at right now with what I've shared so far?
Astonished.
Vanessa, I need to know where to send you the check for today's therapy.
I know.
This is, it's so valuable to hear it, again, having experienced it. I was a victim of domestic violence on the part of my wife.
Mhm.
But I only survived it for 10 years.
Only like
Only
that is
10
that's
10
a
years.
war.
Till my brain finally told me that that's not the way marriage is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that you're mentioning are connecting. Also what Karen mentioned earlier, how we're being pressed from all sides. That experience of helplessness, of,
Yeah.
I love her and I have to take it, and it comes from, either party. And even children, it's, well, she tells me she loves me, that's why she's hitting me. That's why she's disciplining me. In parent education, we talk a little bit about, and I'm not a psychologist, I've done a little bit of reading, but one of the things that you mentioned earlier is how the brain releases these chemicals, the feel-good chemicals,
Dopamine.
the dopamine, and that's what keeps us in that relationship, because during that honeymoon session stage, it feels great. It feels wonderful. We want more of it. It is an addictive chemical.
Intermittent reinforcement. Yeah, it's trauma bonding.
And it's difficult, even when things are not going great, we want our fix.
Yeah.
And we need our fix. And so we put up with a lot of stuff, and it grows. It doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's slowly, the narcissistic personality is slowly working on getting that power over the other person. So thank you for the very, very, very valuable education.
Of course, you're welcome.
A little part that I heard shows that it is more complex than we would think, and I thought you brought it out quite well. This is Pastor Ringo at Bethel Church.
Hi, Pastor. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yes. One thing, you said something I've never heard. Healthy narcissists, the healthy part of the narcissist. I think we need to do a deeper dive in that. Maybe next time you come and visit us, you can share on what that is, because I never heard of narcissism having a healthy spotlight on it. That's amazing to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything can be, I'm going to say healthy, but in excess, malignant or pathological. Narcissism, I don't know if it's healthy, but it's a normal, healthy part of human development. Absolutely. In childhood. Yes.
Thank you for that. Rita, I see Rita's hands up. Not to cut you off, Dr. Rodriguez.
No, go ahead.
Rita, you could go ahead.
Hello, my name is Rita Godfrey, and this is just an eye opener because I have a daughter that is with a gentleman. They have children together with somebody like this narcissist. But how does it affect like my grandchildren now? They are in elementary school, and I'm sure they suffer. And I see things in them, how they are like you were saying at one point, where they're growing and they're, you know, separated from their mother, and whatever she's traumatized from this relationship has like, it's, I don't know, I feel like it's growing into the kids now. And they are, you know, in adolescent age, they're in, you know, elementary school, and it's just a little unsettling and fearful for that, because they're still in that revolving wheel of, and then what he does is he leaves the area. He always works out of town, and then, you know, comes back as if nothing is wrong, you know. Or I think, I don't know, I think he uses a separation as a way to get more love, or, you know, or I don't know. It's just so crazy to me. It's very sad, and I'm just worried even more now with the little ones, the kids.
Yeah, you know, these trauma bonded abusive relationships, parents, you know, they are so, it's not just the behaviors that are going back and forth, you know, it's these reenactments of, like I said, the subconscious and psychodynamics that play out. And of course, I hear your concern, you know, with the kids. And it's sad because yes, DV is a learned behavior. You know, again, I'm not minimizing but I'm talking, you know, the deeper work that's happening, you know. And I think what Julio was talking about, what reminded me why it is so difficult, you know, for people that are being victimized to end it, is because what I was saying about this dual mothership concept, shared fantasy, and this idealization stage, the person that is abusive, they regress you to be a mother to them. So they love you like a mother. They love you like a mother, and they regress you, but then you also become their mother. So what happens is that any thought of, say, if I'm being victimized and abused, and I'm in a narcissistic relationship like this, I will have an insurmountable like so much guilt and pain and worry, believe it or not, for my abusive partner, as if I'm abandoning my child. Even though there are real children at home. And that's why kind of cognitively people will say, well, we're married, we have kids, there's cultural influences, there's religious influence, my family, my retirement, my money, finances, house, everything. But again, the subconscious psychodynamics of the psycho-emotional pull is kind of even deeper. And who wants to abandon their child? And so it's a very difficult experience, but studies do say that you need at least one safe, stable parent to help foster an environment for a child's personality and psyche to you know, to be healthy. So yeah, I worry about people that are in these relationships very much on both ends, because it's suffering too, believe it or not, for people that are abusing it, because it's a compulsion. It's a compulsory compensatory dance that they do, and they almost can't. And I'm not saying help it to alleviate their decisions. But again, what the driving force is the psychodynamic, psycho-acrobats that people aren't really kind of putting to the conscious. What else, you guys? Okay. So I did just want to leave you with
I have a question real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Rodriguez.
Yeah.
So for that child that's in that environment, and say, for example, the parents don't want to get therapy. but they might be willing to get it for their child. Would that be helpful for the child, or does the parents also need to be getting some clinical assistance?
I mean, I'm biased. I think everybody should be in some sort of expert clinical support and treatment, education, not by a friend, not by just like someone who they have years and years and years of clinical training, clinical education, experience, books, research, treatment. So, I mean, I think everybody ought to be getting some knowledge from a therapist. But it's difficult, you know, all the work that myself and the team here that we do with only children or teens. Oftentimes parents will come in and the child is what we call as the IP, the identified patient. Like, here's my problem child, fix them. Our kind of practice here anyway is we like to see things as a system. These are systemic problems. And so we really encourage the parents to either come in at the beginning or at the tail end of the session, or if not, every maybe 2 or 3 sessions, we do have a conjoint with parent, or with at least a parent, if not the entire family system. Because again, I mean, you can water a plant as much as you'd like, but if the environment is awful and toxic, doesn't matter how much water you provide it. So environment is massive. So yeah.
One more thing before one more thing.
Yeah.
So with the faith leaders here, you gave us a whole lot you gave us a steak when we had a paper plate.
I mean, like this is, yeah.
No, that's great though. We're happy about that and we welcome it. But one of our goals in the faith community for the DV Council is to equip churches and to educate them and support them and offer trainings and services like what you provide. So I do have one Lutheran church that's open but I think and we'd love to hear from some of the faith leaders about what their needs are, what their thoughts are after hearing some of this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And are you open to offering those trainings to faith community?
Yeah, absolutely. You know,
Okay.
and I think I would love to, because I know, you know, I think that the term narcissism and narcissistic abuse has been very popular the past couple years with what's been going on in just our world today and more recently. But again, you know, so with this kind of notion of evil, good, kind of moral ethics, and I want to kind of suspend that or kind of help combat that. And I think oftentimes healing from a narcissistic abusive relationship or ending a domestic violence, family violence, any kind of abusive environment almost calls for a rebirth, a symbolic, you know, sacrifice, kind of metaphorically, you guys, you know, killing yourself, like brand new to become the authentic self, your inner child, your true loving, compassionate person, individual. So yeah, absolutely, I'd be happy to. So I do want to wrap up with a quick little 3 checklist cheat sheet to see whether or not you or someone you're working with is in a quote unquote shared fantasy, dual mothership, narcissistic style relationship. Okay. And those 3 kind of markers are: 1, these are the real kind of markers for a real, when I say real, antithesis of fantasy, real relationship. Number one, vulnerability. So it's this willingness to be vulnerable, this willingness to accept inevitable hurt and pain, because most relationships, regrettably, cause hurting. You know, sadly, I'm not being pessimistic. That is a fact. That's a fact. And remember, so I'm talking about this willingness to be vulnerable. Remember what I was saying about this false self? A false self has no vulnerability. A false self has no empathy. A false self isn't. A false self is it's a essence of what isn't rather than what is. And what is real is vulnerability in relationships. So again, this willingness to accept vulnerability, willingness to accept, to embrace, to learn from, and to build upon pain and hurt. The essence of willingness to be vulnerable is critical in real relationships, not fantasy star relationships, real relationships. All right, number two is having dreams, having goals, but shared dreams and shared goals. So planning, not living in fantasy land. So if you and your partner have common aspirations, common dreams, common goals, and not only that, but you're planning and implementing practical steps to attain or obtain these shared commonalities, shared goals, shared values. So if you have this is another marker that you're in a real, not fantastical fantasy style relationship. And then the last, third and final test to see if you're in a real, genuine, healthy, authentic relationship is having a realistic perception of the other. A realistic perception of the other, not this idealized, oh, they complete me, I'm a blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm not talking down on love and intimacy, but a realistic perception of the other. So not this idealized love bombing space, but also not only not idealizing, but you're not devaluing. You're not devaluing, you're not discarding, you're not abusing, you're not gaslighting, you're not doing all of the abuse. So you don't idealize, but you don't devalue. So you have a realistic sense of your partner's limitations, what your partner's strengths and weaknesses are, what your partner's capable of, what you're capable of, what your strengths, a realistic perception of your own strengths, your own weaknesses, and essentially what you can rely on your partner, how you can trust them. So again, reality testing. Fantasy, you guys, the shared fantasy concept was developed by Winnicott, and it's a shared fantasy is a defense mechanism. Think of, again, children live in fantasy. They're imaginative, they're creative, you know, that's a strength, that's a beautiful thing. But again, if the child gets stuck, that fantasy becomes malignant, it becomes pathological. So it becomes bad fantasy. So they don't live in reality. Narcissists and people that are in narcissistic abusive relationships have very they have an immense amount of cognitive distortions and cognitive dissonance. Immense amount. They don't live in reality, because the reality is that they're abusive. But they do not live in reality. That's why people that are living in reality, hey, they're abusive, they're abusive, they're abusive. You're not happy, you're not happy. They shun it. And the cycle of abuse is known as denial. But in these psychoanalytic terms, it's this dual mothership. I love him. He's my, they don't say, oh, he's my mother or he's my father. And this on both ends. There are women narcissists too. And so there's not a realistic image of their partner. So to wrap up, those are the kind of 3 quick ways to ground. Willingness to be vulnerable. What did I say? Willingness to be vulnerable. I forget what was what was the second thing I said? Oh, thank you, Gina. There's the shared goals, shared planning, shared themes. And the third is that it's realistic, that they're based in reality, not in fantasy land and la la land. Okay. Well, any final questions? Yes, Miss Amelia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. I wanted to, as Karen said, I wanted to kind of lay a foundation of how faith leaders can support their families. And this is so much information and really excellent insight, but it's like we can't give insight to these families. So I think my question is, what do we want to normalize? What is the language that we want to use when speaking with families to kind of guide them to go on this path of gaining insight? Is it normalizing how to find professional support? Is it normalizing,
Sure.
What is it that you are the tools for us to support people in our congregations and families that we want to support?
Good question. So I think 2 pieces to that. One, the practical way to support is always safety, whatever that looks like for them. But my hope is with this information that you guys have a deeper understanding of the whys. It is very difficult for them to receive the support that we are attempting to provide them. And the whys are these concepts of this is much deeper, the connection, this fantasy, this lifestyle, this living. It's much more deeper what's going on in these relationships. And so I think, practically speaking, like I said, the support is about safety. And I think with the work that, we all do in this community, obviously I'm coming from my lens, that's my expertise, but in terms of accessing support services, housing, food, legal, shelter, all of that. I think it's not, and you guys know this, probably some of you know, it's not as welcoming immediately for the people that are in these abusive relationships. And I think if you guys have this knowledge kind of built in to you when you approach them, it's hoping for you guys to have empathy in a way that describes essentially what I said, the mother, unconditional mother, maternal love, and abandoning their, even though it's their partner, their adult partner, but it's a feeling of abandoning their child. And so if you can connect with them on that piece, it's a different key. It's a different key to open that they didn't even know that key existed. They had no idea that there was even a lock there. And so even by you providing some, even this, basic education on the challenges of the guilt and the abandonment that they feel when trying to access support services, trying to end a relationship, that ambivalence and that cognitive dissonance. So just by pinpointing that and kind of highlighting that and throwing it out on the table to provide awareness, I think will create a bigger, better, stronger buy-in for them to connect to these support services that we have in the community.
Vanessa, I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend faith leaders to use something like the ACEs questionnaire for people to do some self-awareness, self-reflection, to better understand ourselves and what are some of the childhood traumatic experiences that may have led us to the situation that we're currently in?
Absolutely. Again, I'm biased, but I think knowledge is power. It's self-power, and victims, survivors of abuse are powerless. They're helpless. They're this learned helpless. And yes, trauma bonding, intermittent reinforcement, what we were saying about the body, the parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nerve, everything, all that's working. I can talk forever about the body responses to abuse, but absolutely. I think if having more cognitive self-awareness, at least, right? There's cognitive self-awareness. I'm speaking more of the psychodynamics today. There's psychodynamics awareness. There's somatic awareness, body awareness. And so the more knowledge, the more equipped that we are about what is going on in our selves or individual in ourself, the more self-agency that we're going to have in interpersonal relationships. And whether that's intimate relationship, whether that's, children, neighbors, coworkers, bosses, family, cousins, it's all relationships. And I think a lot of people still don't give the weight of neglect as a childhood trauma. People think childhood trauma is all, violence and abuse and torture. And yes, it is. But something, a grimace. If someone looks at me and makes a grimace, it makes a, face at me, that can emotionally injure me. That can traumatize me. Or, they have studies that if you put someone in a room and the whole room is committed to ignoring you, they are committed to ignoring you, that person, the studies, will begin to doubt their reality. They will begin to doubt that they exist. That's torture. It's neglect. So I think, regarding the ACEs score, there's domains on all different types of traumatic experience, adverse childhood experiences. So yeah, I think a lot of people ought to have all kinds of education on trauma. What
Wow.
else, you guys? Anything else?
Great question about the ACEs testing. And I think that's a great offering for us. When I talk about faith leaders, I'm always saying, well, what's our offering to take to them? And I think that's a really good tool and a starting point to be able to even engage, educate, because if I don't know what's going on with me, then how could anyone help me? So I love that. And there's a lot of kudos in the chat for you, Dr. Rodriguez.
Thank you.
You're amazing. Brilliant teaching and very high level. So thank you for taking us higher today. And, and we will be following up with you on some of the outcome or responses that we get from faith leaders about other ways that we can support them.
Of
That's
course.
one of our biggest goals. And are there any more questions or thoughts that you'd like to share with Dr. Rodriguez? We really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank
And
you.
someone offered you, yeah, I think that was,
What?
Youssef, was it Youssef offered, made an offering for you?
I don't. Oh, yes.
Oh, it was Julio.
Oh,
It was
Julio, yeah.
Yeah, Julio.
Yeah, I think that's who, yeah. I think they're the two that haven't seen each other in a long time, right?
Yeah. So anything in the chat that, you put up the aces, someone put up the aces, I'll make sure that, the big leaders that got the invite and responded, I'll make sure that gets over to them. And we really appreciate your insight, your expertise, and we
Mhm.
thank our creator for the brilliant mind and the way that you're being used to help to strengthen communities.
Mhm.
And so we really, really appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job.
Okay. Thank
So-
you.
Yes, we look forward to hearing from you again
Okay.
in the near future. And
All right, have a-
congratulations on your accepting the presidency for the TV
Aw,
Council.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna make sure that the faith leaders are invited to that event in October, and we'd love to be able to see you in person as well.
Same.
All right, thank you.
All right,
all for
Karen.
joining
Have a
us
good day,
today.
you guys.
Yes, you as well, Doctor.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks, Dr. Ringo. See you soon, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amelia, for all your support. You and Mia couldn't do this without you.
Yeah, what is it? Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a good rest of the week. Thanks, Dr. Ringo, for showing up. You've made my heart smile today. Thank you.
Okay, Karen, I'm gonna go ahead and end it.
Okay. See you soon. Bye-bye.